and welcome back to Foreign Correspondents. I'm Sami Sorang with our panel of foreign journalists. Welcome to the program. So the 2018 inter-Korean summit has just come and gone. What kind of stories did you write about in covering the summit?
Well, for me, since it was a breaking news day, I did a lot of television interviews because the news channels, they had to be updated. So I was sometimes just commenting the new pictures that just got in, or the declaration that they made. Just 5 minutes later, I would be on TV. So it was really just like commentating what happened 10 minutes ago. And in the evening, I did some newspaper stories, a little bit featurey, not only what the news agencies write, but also a little bit more with atmosphere from people on the street and something like that. Yeah.
Okay. And what about you, Matt?
So because of the time difference, I didn't have the same concerns about regular updates. So I did a long feature type story explaining the potential optics and what was at stake in the meeting.
Sure.
And then at the moment that they crossed the MDL together, I was able to get that story into the paper as well. And then after a long day of absorbing all the imagery of them walking together, of them holding hands and crossing, the sort of odd scene of them planting the tree or putting dirt on the tree, was able to put all that together in kind of an atmospheric piece. So it was a busy day, but not regular updates.
So did you do 2 stories in total then?
I did 2 stories on the day of the event, and then a story the day before, and then several stories leading up to that. Yeah.
Okay, Fred?
And for me, before the summit, of course, I did a lot of analytical features, interviewing people, asking their opinions. But the day of the summit itself, it's very simple. I do mostly radio, so you have to describe what's happening. So you really stick to the facts and explain to people, because in France, the summit happened in the morning, so it was perfect for the morning news. So I was explaining, Kim Jong-un crossed the border, holding hand with Jae-in, all these very, very strong images. Like you can see them really stepping on this small march that shows the border. So I spent, and I cannot really tell the number of stories. It's constant flow. There is an update all the time.
Okay. All right, the April 27th Moon-Kim summit proved to be a pivotal milestone in inter-Korean relations. So this week on Foreign Correspondents, the topic is 2018 Inter-Korean Summit. At long last, the leaders of South and North Korea met face-to-face for the first time in 11 years. On the morning of April 27th, South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un met for the 2018 Inter-Korean Summit at the Peace House in Panmunjom.
아주 오늘 좋은 논의들을 많이 이루어서 아주 우리 남북의 국민들에게 그리고 또 전 세계 사람들에게 아주 좋은 선물이 될 것 같습니다.
많이 기대하셨던 분들한테 물론 이제 시작에 빙산 일각에 지나지 않지만 우리 첫 만남과 오늘 이야기된 이게 이제 발표되고 하면 기대하셨던 분들한테 조금이나마 그 기대를 만족을 드렸으면 하는 그런 바람입니다.
Then in the afternoon, the 2 leaders took part in a tree planting ceremony, followed by a 30-minute walk, where the 2 leaders held a private discussion. After another round of discussions, Moon and Kim put their signatures on the Panmunjom Declaration, outlining the summit agreements. The declaration calls for comprehensive and meaningful measures to improve inter-Korean relations, as well as peace and denuclearization of the peninsula, which had been agreed upon between the 2 leaders.
북한 김정은 위원장은 27일 판문점 남측 평화의 집에서 열린 문재인 대통령과의 남북 정상회담에서 북부 핵실험장 폐쇄를 5월 중 실행할 것이라며 이를 국제사회에 투명하게 공개하기 위해 한국과 미국의 전문가와 언론인들을 조만간 북한으로 초청하겠다고 밝혔습니다.
In addition, President Moon is to visit North Korea in the fall.
김정은 위원장과 나는 평화를 바라는 8천만 계려의 염원으로 역사적인 만남을 갖고 귀중한 합의를 이루었습니다. 한반도에 더 이상 전쟁은 없을 것이며 새로운 평화의 시대가 열리고 있음을 함께 선언하였습니다.
온 결의가 전쟁 없는 평화로운 땅에서 번영과 행복을 누리는 새 시대를 열어나갈 확고한 의지를 같이 하고 이를 위한 실천적 대책들을 합의하였습니다.
So in this week's edition of Foreign Correspondents, we sit down with our panel of journalists to discuss the 2018 inter-Korean summit that shocked the world. Now let's first talk about the press center. There were over 3,000 members of the press covering the event from Kintex. From where did you watch the summit unfold?
I was at the press center, but at the Foreign Press Center in Seoul. But actually when, for example, the handshake was broadcast or Kim Jong-un crossing the line, those images I saw at Seoul Plaza. That's basically the square in front of City Hall, and there was a big screen where citizens could watch it. And you know, it was early in the morning and most people were busy working, so at that time there were, I think, 90% of the spectators were journalists. A lot of prominent TV journalists that I could recognize, you know, from watching TV. Now they saw them in person. But you know, I got some really meaningful interviews as well. For example, there was one woman, she took her day off and parked her car in the Plaza Hotel, and then rushed to the square to see it on time. And she was also one of the first tourists who went to Kimgangsan when there was the inter-Korean tourism still operating. And for her, it was really a historic moment. And she watched the handshake scene at the same place where she watched the World Cup 15 years ago, and it was really nice. Yeah.
Okay. Was there any particular reason that you chose to see it from there as opposed to Kintex?
I mean, Kintex, that's a little bit cut off from reality also, because you hang around with 3,000 journalists and experts, but for me it was important to get some, you know, just with average people, get some atmosphere in the city center. So I think for me that was the perfect place to be. And you know, you have some visual aspects too. In Kintex, you sit in a very modern but also very, how to say, clean and I mean, there's not much to do for a reportage, I think.
Right. I think it's the perfect place to get a lot of live feed, but it can be somewhat sterile in terms of getting information from the public. Yeah. What about you, Matt? On which channel did you see the event?
So I followed it through the live stream. I followed it here on Arirang, and also I had a colleague that I work with from the LA Times who was at Kintex, so we were able to work together as a team.
Okay, and he sent you some live feeds as well. All right.
The exact same reasons as Fabian, I decided to stay in the press center of City Hall because I wanted as well to interview people. So I could follow the live on Arirang actually and other news channel. And I was able, when I had time, to go down the street. And for example, I remember this mother who came with her 2 kids to show them like history being made.
왜 여기 오셨어요? 애들이랑?
아이들한테 보여주는 게 교육적으로 도움이 될 거라고 생각을 해서 왔습니다. 기대되고 좀 감동적이고 마음속에서 정말 한반도에 평화가 정착됐으면 좋겠다라는 좀 희망을 갖게 됐습니다.
You know, it was interesting to have this as well, to make it more personal. And once again, as a correspondent, when you're in Korea, you want to let Korean people speak. So it was better, I think, from my point of view, as a radio journalist, than being in Kintex.
Okay. Now, in terms of letting the public speak, what were their reaction? What was the atmosphere like?
It's very diverse. I mean, you have, for example, at Gangwamun, you know, the central square in Seoul, you had pro-unification people who were really happy, and they saw that declaration yesterday as a big step. But a couple of 100 meters away, in front of Toksugung, you had as well a tent of very conservative people, anti-communist, who were very angry. So, I mean, you have very diverse opinion, but from my feeling, most Korean people seem very satisfied with the summit, in the sense that last year we were talking about war. We were really afraid that conflict might erupt, and it seemed that at least temporarily these worries are calmed down, I would say.
Is that the experience you had?
Yeah, I mean, the demographic change is important. Like, the older people, they're really more skeptic because, I mean, they did not only see the sunshine policy unfold, but they also saw it fail or lead to disappointment, and they don't really trust North Korea, and they think, or some think it's maybe even a waste of time to negotiate with them. But let's say everyone, or not everyone, but most people below 40, I think they're in generally positive towards the summit, and I think they have a pragmatic view. I think there's only a minority who really thinks this will lead to a, let's say, a unification on a short term, but they want a de-escalation of the military tensions, and I think for that the summit was quite historic.
Right.
Something I could feel reading on the social networks, on the internet, is that for many young South Korean people, the image of Kim Jong-un changed. They had this image, I mean, he's a very authoritarian leader, but through this summit you could see a more human aspect of him. He was making jokes, he was smiling, he was like basically being a human being, and I think that somehow that affected a lot of young South Korean people who discovered that.
Right, okay. And what were some of the takeaway moments? What stood out the most for you during the summit?
When Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un went for a tea outside and talking, they were like, for 2 minutes, Kim Jong-un was really like modestly, silently, you know, listening to Moon Jae-in. It looked like a teacher, student, or a father-son relation. And I mean, obviously no one in the world has ever seen the leader of North Korea like that, and I found it an impressive image.
That talk that they had on the deck was a really interesting moment for me, because there was no staff. They didn't need an interpreter in the way that Trump will need with Kim, so there's not that interruption and those awkward silences. And the fact that they sat, and I was just fascinated by what they were actually discussing. But there were so many moments. I mean, seeing the two of them just walk down the stairs and cross and go to separate podiums to give their statements, or seeing them walk across and back across and have this rapport on the borderline was a striking moment.
문 대통령은 김정은 위원장과 역사적인 악수를 하면서 남측으로 오시는데 나는 언제쯤 넘어갈 수 있겠느냐. 이에 김 위원장은 그럼 지금 넘어가 볼까요? 라고 하면서 문 대통령의 손을 이끌었습니다.
But I did find myself, as they did their walk together down that newly paved path to that deck on Google Earth, zooming in, trying to figure out exactly where they were, and that deck is new.
Okay. I think that one of the questions that a lot of people have is, what did they actually talk about on that deck? Because it wasn't broadcast.
But I mean, you can read lips, right? I'm wondering how many people right now are trying to deciphering exactly what they said, because we must have some clues, I guess.
What stood out for you?
Really, for me, the most memorable image and the most unbelievable image was, once again, Moon Jae-in at the border, waiting for Kim Jong-un to arrive, this handshake between the two blue houses at the border, this little dance where, hey, why don't you come step in the north for a few seconds? And I was really, I mean, these images will stay in history books, I think.
I agree. Now let's talk about the highs and lows of the summit. What do you think was done well, probably the most well-done thing during the summit?
Well, they had very little time to prepare, and so the stagecraft seemed to have been handled well. I mean, there were a couple of unscripted moments that you wouldn't expect, like the invitation to walk over to the north. I don't think that Moon's staff was prepared for that.
Right.
So that was done well. I think maybe one criticism of the summit is that it was so short. They spent very little time together in the morning, and then they had a little bit of time together in the afternoon. But it gave the sense, and I know these things are ceremonial and they really are about the imagery of seeing them two together. But had it been a 2-day summit, maybe they could have spent a little bit more time talking and a little bit more time preparing for how they're going to engage with Trump on this issue.
Right. So they could have had more time to talk about other issues that weren't covered this time around. What's your opinion? What was done well and what wasn't?
You mean on the procedure? I think that the result was very well. I mean, I was happy to read the joint statement. They basically committed themselves for denuclearization, continue human exchange programs. So I think that was a very strong statement. You could maybe criticize that it was not concrete enough in small steps, but I mean that's the case for most of these statements. So I was actually generally pleased. And yeah, okay, maybe one point of criticism is that comes from many NGOs. The human rights situation was not mentioned, but if you see it in a pragmatic way, I think Moon Jae-in could actually, in the end, change the human rights situation in North Korea more by, you know, subtly doing it and not like finger pointing too much. So it's kind of, I mean, it's hard to have a judgment on that, I think.
Right. So perhaps more could be achieved by skirting around it this time around?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Okay.
I think there was a fair point, the fact that human rights were not mentioned. I hope that Moon Jae-in found a way, when they had this private discussion, to make Kim Jong-un understand that maybe if he opened his border more, if he reduced the oppression of its people, maybe if he opened the camp, that would make it much more easier for everybody to deal with North Korea and to reduce the sanction. I mean, North Korea is it's a huge problem. And I hope, I mean, I understand why they don't talk about it, but I do hope that they find a way to do it soon, even on a private matter, maybe even not publicly.
Now, for the average South Korean citizen, let's see what they are feeling. In one of the polls leading up to the summit, 7 out of 10 South Koreans said that they support the summit, but only 5 out of 10 said that they actually expect it to lead to a meaningful change. So why do you think there's that discrepancy?
Well, I think it's sort of human nature to be open to dialogue. You know, it's really hard to criticize two leaders coming together to try to talk. But I do think it also reflects the cynicism among much of the public, that especially in older generations that have seen these deals fall apart, or the North revert back to a confrontational posture even though they've made some overture. And that's probably why that second figure is lower. People just have lower expectations about the follow-through from these kind of events.
Oh, definitely the older demographic. I mean, I interview people who are in their 50s who told me, oh, I remember when North Korea, for example, destroyed their cooling tower of the Yongbyon nuclear power plant. That was 10 years ago. And after that, we got many new nuclear tests, so people are a bit worried, and I can understand that. I think a lot of people doubt of how genuine North Korea is about all this commitment to denuclearization.
Okay, so let's move on to the geopolitical ramifications. Which of the regional powers do you think was most pleased or most satisfied with the outcome of the summit?
Well, surely China, among the major regional powers, is pleased. They were able to get Kim to come to Beijing to discuss their concerns. For now, they've averted a war. They may be on a path to where this neighbor doesn't have nuclear weapons, or starts the process of maybe dismantling them or slowing down the development. That's all good news for China. And they don't have to worry about, perhaps anytime soon, a unified Korea that's under the United States' control.
What do you think U.S.'s opinion was?
Well, I mean, Trump tweeted about it. It was generally positive.
What I found, cool,
yeah, but you know, in his first reaction, he wrote like, "Good things are happening, a historic summit, but only the future will tell." And I think I interpreted this as a remark that he wants to leave some, you know, space for himself to really close the deal and, you know, finalize the dismantling of the nuclear weapons, for example. And I think, Matt, when you mentioned China, I think China will really play an important role in that process, because I don't think North Korea will be, you know, trusting the US so much that they will show all their nuclear arsenal directly and destroying it, but rather I think China could play that role in checking that maybe.
Okay. Let's move on to the future and what was written in the Panmunjom Declaration. First of all, what's your general impression of the Panmunjom Declaration?
There is a lot of very interesting and very significant aspects. For example, they will open a liaison bureau, that will be permanent, there will be a second meeting. The fact that they, I mean, of course, the obvious fact that they want to declare the end of war, official end of war, and sign a peace treaty. A lot of media talked a lot about denuclearization. Of course, that was a very important aspect, but if you read the declaration, that was at the end of it, was one of the last paragraphs. And it was actually pretty vague. There is no roadmap, there is no concrete measure. So you can really feel that they included denuclearization, but now it's up to Donald Trump, to the President American, during their summit with Kim Jong-un to close that deal, to finally get a concrete roadmap, tangible measures to solve this issue.
Okay, well, speaking of the US, it was part of the Panmunjom Declaration, but how do you rate the possibility of a trilateral summit or a quadrilateral summit occurring in the near future?
That would be great, and I think that would be necessary, especially if you want to sign a peace treaty. The armistice was signed by North Korea, United States and China. So if you want to sign a peace treaty, you need them, and the United States are the main ally, military ally of South Korea. So of course, they need to be included in the peace treaty too.
Okay. And in terms of concrete takeaways from this summit, what do you think each leader has gained from this summit?
I think for Kim Jong-un, he gained a lot in terms of image. He appeared like a statesman, like a legitimate ruler of North Korea. He appeared human. I mean, I even heard some people say, oh, he's a man of peace. I'm like, wow, come on, I mean, remember who he really is. So that was a huge communication coup for him. For Moon Jae-in, I think he managed to start a process. I mean, we were really afraid of war last year, and now we are talking about signing peace agreement. We're talking about denuclearization. He managed to gain, to arrange a meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. I mean, I still remember this cover of Time magazine with the face of Moon Jae-in, and the title was A Negotiator. And this is still so true today. It really shows huge diplomatic skills.
Right, and CNN's coverage as well, the negotiator, the facilitator.
Yeah, and I think for Kim, he gets the illusion of peace, while at the same time, I agree with you, getting to appear to be a statesman. I mean, this document that was released is not legally binding. They could change it or decide not to follow it tomorrow. But he does get to make himself appear to be a human being on the world stage, which is important for his image and the potential for easing sanctions later. I think for Moon, he gets a commitment to peace. He gets validation that this effort, that this sort of, at times seemed quixotic effort to get the two leaders to sit down together and have dialogue paid off. He made it happen, and it was a positive outcome, and he also did it without offending the leadership of the United States.
Now, also included in the Panmunjom Declaration is the agreement for President Moon Jae-in to visit Pyongyang in fall. Do you think there will be any high-level meetings before then?
Oh yes, very probably. In May there is a military high-ranking officials meeting, and I think that's really important. And this is what we want to see now. We want to see a reduction of military tensions. So this is why this summit is so important, because it's not only the two leaders meeting, it's how they start a lot of working level meetings.
Okay. So aside from talking about the separated families and also humanitarian issues, what do you think should be discussed at that fall meeting, at the fall summit?
Well, I mean, who knows at what point we'll be by fall. I mean, if you listen to some of the policy advisors of Moon Jae-in, they are really optimistic that actually the denuclearization could go very, very fast, and actually it has to be finished within Trump's term. And that sounds astonishing for many people, but I mean, I talked to one advisor. He told me, ideally, by the next 6 months, we want to have North Korea give up 50% of its nukes, of its nuclear arsenal. And I'm sure that by fall, yeah, we should talk about denuclearization in a very more concrete way, and we should already achieve some steps.
Okay.
And I think in some ways it's just reciprocal, regardless of what's on the agenda. Kim came to the South. Moon, probably for his entire political career, has hoped to have a summit in Pyongyang. And at that moment, depending on what happens with Trump, there might be things to talk about in terms of strategies for getting the world community to ease sanctions or Kaesong or other issues that might be tangible issues that might help North Korea with its economy.
All right, we'll have to wrap up there. Do you have any final comments?
Well, as a correspondent, I'm really happy and proud to have been able to cover such a historic summit. And really, these are images I'll probably never forget.
Yeah.
So it was good to be here.
I would have to echo your sentiment. It's an honor to be working in the field when this is happening. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, I completely agree. It was a really special day. I found myself getting wrapped up in the story emotionally in a way that I haven't been, over a 20-year career in journalism.
Well, for me, yesterday was definitely the most historic day that I covered journalistically. So,
Okay.
I mean, during the day I was so busy and I didn't have much time for contemplation. But actually, before I fell asleep, I actually, let the day, just go through my head one more time, and I realized, how emotional the day was, and really happy to, experience. So I'm really glad that I was in Korea during that time.
Yeah, it does take a while for the significance to sink in. All right, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for taking time.
Thank you.
All right, sometimes it's hard to wrap our heads around just how fast inter-Korean relations are improving, but it is a welcome change. And we look forward to improving inter-Korean relations. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.